October 15th, 1942. A dusty road outside El Alamein, Egypt. German Oberst Friedrich Weber stood beside his disabled Kübelwagen, watching through field glasses as a column of American vehicles approached from the east. His reconnaissance unit had been tracking Allied movements for 3 days, rationing fuel, nursing their temperamental vehicles across terrain that had already claimed 2 of his command cars. The desert heat shimmered across the sand, distorting his view, but what rolled toward him now made him lower his binoculars and squint against the desert sun. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Small, boxy vehicles, dozens of them. They bounced over rocks at speeds that should have shattered their suspensions, kicking up plumes of sand, weaving through terrain his own wagons struggled to cross. The column moved with a confidence that seemed almost reckless, drivers navigating obstacles without slowing, without the careful maneuvering his own drivers employed to preserve their vehicles. One of his junior officers laughed. Spielzeug, toy cars, Herr Oberst. The Americans send children's playthings to war. Weber didn't laugh. He had read the intelligence reports. Dismissive, contemptuous reports that called this vehicle impractical. A lightweight reconnaissance car, the Americans called it, 1/4-ton capacity, something called a jeep. Wehrmacht analysts in Berlin had concluded it was propaganda, an exaggeration of American manufacturing. No nation would waste resources building hundreds of thousands of such crude, simple vehicles when proper military engineering demanded sophistication. Yet here they were, not dozens, hundreds, streaming across the desert in an endless river of steel and canvas, and they weren't slowing down. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The story of how the Germans learned to stop laughing at the Jeep and started stealing every one they could capture is a story of industrial psychology, a story of how an entire military establishment, raised on principles of engineering excellence and mechanical sophistication, confronted a machine that violated every assumption they held about warfare. The Willys MB Jeep embodied a philosophy so alien to German military thinking that encountering it felt, to many Wehrmacht officers, like discovering the rules of war itself had changed. The origins of Germany's contempt stretched back years before the war. Beginning in 1933, the Wehrmacht had implemented the Einheits PKW program, creating standardized military vehicles designed by committee, engineered to perfection, built in moderate quantities by skilled craftsmen. These were proper military machines. The Horch Type 40, the Mercedes-Benz Type OME 75, vehicles that embodied German precision engineering, heavy frames, sophisticated suspension systems, engines built to exacting tolerances. German military planners believed that technological superiority would provide decisive advantages in warfare. This wasn't mere arrogance. It was rooted in Germany's long tradition of engineering excellence, from its universities to its manufacturing plants. The country that had produced diesel, Benz, and countless other mechanical innovations approached military equipment with the same meticulous attention to detail that characterized its civilian industry. By 1938, Ferdinand Porsche had delivered the Kübelwagen, adapted from his Volkswagen Beetle design. It was light, nimble. The 23.5 horsepower air-cooled engine resisted overheating in desert conditions. Its rear-wheel drive and limited slip differential allowed remarkable off-road capability for a vehicle weighing only 1,600 pounds. It seated 4 soldiers comfortably. German engineers were proud. This was how you built a military vehicle: attention to detail, sophisticated solutions to complex problems. The Kübelwagen represented everything German engineering valued. Its air-cooled engine eliminated the need for a radiator, reducing weight and complexity. The reduction gearing at the rear wheels provided excellent torque multiplication. The independent suspension, adapted from Porsche's civilian design, offered superior ride quality over rough terrain. Compared to the British vehicles German forces encountered in North Africa, it was clearly superior in design, elegance, and mechanical sophistication. Then, In July 1940, across the Atlantic, the United States Army issued a procurement notice that German intelligence would later dismiss as fantasy. The Army wanted a lightweight, four-wheel drive reconnaissance vehicle. Weight limit, 1,300 pounds. Payload capacity, 600 pounds. Four-wheel drive, capable of climbing 60% grades. Top speed 50 miles per hour. Able to ford streams, mounting provisions for a machine gun. And they wanted prototypes delivered in 49 days. 135 American automotive companies received the request. 133 declined immediately. The specifications were impossible. The weight limit alone seemed unachievable for a vehicle with four-wheel drive, which required additional drive shafts, transfer cases, and front differential assemblies. Most automotive engineers calculated that such a vehicle would weigh at least 2,000 pounds, making the Army's requirements nothing more than wishful thinking from officers who didn't understand engineering realities. But two small companies decided to try anyway. American Bantam Car Company, operating out of a struggling factory in Butler, Pennsylvania, and Willys Overland Motors in Toledo, Ohio, a company that had barely survived the Great Depression. These weren't industry giants like General Motors or Chrysler. They were desperate companies fighting for survival, willing to attempt the impossible because they had nothing to lose. The chief engineer at Bantam, Carl Probst, spent sleepless nights sketching designs. He approached the problem not by asking how to build a perfect vehicle, but by asking what could be eliminated. He eliminated everything unnecessary: no doors, minimal body panels, a fold-down windshield, stripped down to function. The Bantam prototype, called the Blitz Buggy, rolled into testing at Camp Holabird, Maryland on September 23, 1940. It worked. Barely. It violated the weight limit by 240 pounds, but it climbed hills, forded streams, and didn't break. Meanwhile, Willys Overland engineer Barney Roos was developing something remarkable, an engine he called the Go Devil, 134 cubic inches, 60 horsepower at 4,000 RPM. Not impressive by German standards, where automotive engineers prized high compression ratios and sophisticated valve timing, but engineered with a philosophy German mechanics would struggle to understand. This engine wasn't built to be perfect. It was built to be simple, producible, and maintainable by soldiers with minimal training. Roos had worked for Locomobile, Marmon, and Studebaker before joining Willys. He understood American manufacturing. The Go Devil used a flathead design that was outdated by contemporary standards but offered crucial advantages for mass production. The engine block could be cast in one piece. Valve adjustment was simple. The compression ratio was conservative, allowing it to run on lower-grade fuel. It would never win performance competitions, but it could be built by the thousands and serviced by anyone with basic mechanical knowledge. The U.S. Army tested all three prototypes, Bantam, Willys, and Ford, and made a decision that would echo across battlefields worldwide. They ordered 16,000 vehicles from Willys, incorporating design elements from all three manufacturers. The standardized design combined Bantam's four-wheel drive transmission, Willys's powerful engine, and Ford's stamped body panels. Most critically, every part would be interchangeable. A bolt from a Willys Jeep would fit a Ford Jeep perfectly, color-coded wiring, clearly labeled components, designed so that any mechanic, regardless of training, could service any Jeep with basic tools. This standardization represented a revolutionary approach to military procurement. Traditional military vehicle programs specified performance requirements and allowed manufacturers to develop their own solutions. The result was a hodgepodge of vehicles requiring different spare parts, different maintenance procedures, different training programs. The U.S. Army decided to sacrifice manufacturer innovation for logistical efficiency. The decision bewildered European military observers. Why would you want identical vehicles from different manufacturers? Wouldn't competition between manufacturers drive innovation and improvement? The Americans had concluded that in warfare, the ability to maintain and repair equipment in the field mattered more than marginal performance improvements. A mechanic who could service any Jeep with confidence was more valuable than slightly better performance from one manufacturer's design. German intelligence received reports of this vehicle throughout 1941. The assessments were uniform, crude, simplistic, lacking the sophistication of proper military engineering. The four-wheel drive system was inelegant, using a simple transfer case rather than more sophisticated limited-slip differentials. The suspension used primitive leaf springs rather than advanced torsion bars or independent suspension systems. The body was stamped steel, not carefully crafted panels shaped by skilled metal workers. Weight distribution was poor, with the vehicle weighing 2,454 pounds, 900 pounds heavier than the Kübelwagen. Wehrmacht technical analysts concluded the Americans were making fundamental errors. They were building vehicles too heavy for efficiency, too simple for reliability. The reports noted, almost with pity, that American engineering philosophy appeared to prioritize manufacturing ease over performance. This was not how you won wars. Wars were won with superior technology, German technology. The analysts pointed to specific design choices that confirmed their assessment. The Jeep's frame was essentially two channel section rails, far simpler than the sophisticated chassis designs used in German vehicles. The body panels showed visible spot welds, evidence of mass production techniques rather than proper craftsmanship. The entire vehicle could be disassembled with basic hand tools, which German engineers interpreted as evidence of poor integration and excessive modularity. Then the vehicles began arriving in North Africa. British forces received the first Jeeps in 1941 through Lend-Lease. By early 1942, American units were deploying them by the thousands, and German units were capturing their first examples. The initial encounters produced mockery. Soldiers called them Kisten, boxes, Spielzeug, toys. Officers examined captured Jeeps with bemusement. Look at this crude stamping, these basic welds. The Americans had sent vehicles that looked like they'd been assembled in a bicycle factory. One early German technical report, filed in March 1942, described a captured Jeep as representative of American automotive standards, which prioritize mass production over engineering excellence. The vehicle shows promise for reconnaissance in favorable terrain, but lacks the sophistication necessary for sustained military operations. The report was filed and forgotten, because by March 1942, German forces in North Africa were learning something the analysts in Berlin couldn't see from their desks. The Jeeps worked, they worked everywhere, they worked constantly, and there seemed to be an infinite supply of them. Hauptmann Klaus Dietrich commanded a reconnaissance company in the Afrika Korps. His unit had 6 Kübelwagens when they deployed to Libya in January 1942. By April, only 3 remained operational. Sand destroyed air filters despite daily maintenance. Heat warped engine components even on the supposedly heat-resistant air-cooled engines. Spare parts arrived irregularly, if at all, shipped across the Mediterranean on supply convoys that frequently fell victim to British naval and air attacks. His mechanics performed miracles, keeping the vehicles running, fabricating replacement parts from salvaged materials. But miracles had limits. Dietrich watched his unit's mobility deteriorate week by week. Reconnaissance missions were cancelled because vehicles weren't available. Critical intelligence went ungathered because his company lacked the means to patrol assigned sectors. His frustration grew as he watched American and British units operating with apparent impunity, their vehicles always running, always numerous. Then his unit captured an American supply column in late April. Among the prizes, 4 intact Jeeps, cases of spare parts, jerry cans of fuel, and most valuable of all, technical manuals. Dietrich ordered his best mechanic, Feldwebel Hermann Kruger, to inspect them. Kruger was a master technician, trained before the war at a Mercedes-Benz factory in Stuttgart. If anyone could assess these vehicles properly, it was Kruger. What Kruger discovered over the next 2 days would be filed in a report that made its way through channels to Wehrmacht headquarters. The report was detailed, technical, and devastating in its implications. The American vehicle designated Jeep represents a fundamental departure from accepted military automotive design, Kruger wrote, Initial inspection suggests crude construction and inferior materials. However, detailed analysis reveals a design philosophy focused entirely on field conditions rather than engineering elegance. He documented the four-wheel drive system. Simple. A single lever engaged power to all four wheels. No complex calculations about weight distribution or sophisticated differential locks. Compare this to German command cars requiring multiple operations, most of which lacked four-wheel drive entirely. The Kübelwagen's rear-wheel drive, sophisticated as it was, simply couldn't match the Jeep's ability to power through soft sand. Krüger conducted field tests over varied terrain. In loose sand, the Kübelwagen required careful driving, maintaining momentum to avoid becoming stuck. The Jeep simply engaged four-wheel drive and low range, allowing it to crawl forward at walking speed without losing traction. On rocky ground, the Kübelwagen's lighter weight meant its wheels would sometimes skip over obstacles, losing grip. The Jeep's extra weight kept all four wheels planted, maintaining traction. The engine compartment astonished him. Everything was accessible. Open the hood, and every major component could be reached without removing other parts. Color-coded wires meant even untrained soldiers could trace electrical problems. Components were clearly labeled in English, with maintenance points marked in paint. The air filter could be serviced in minutes without tools. The oil filter was externally mounted, easily replaced. A soldier with basic tools could perform most repairs without specialist knowledge. Krüger disassembled the engine, documenting each component. The design was conservative by contemporary standards. A simple flathead configuration, heavy connecting rods that could withstand abuse, generous oil passages, conservative bearing clearances. Everything was overbuilt, designed to survive poor maintenance and harsh operating conditions. This vehicle is not engineered for performance, Krüger concluded. It is engineered for war. The Americans have designed assuming their mechanics will be farm boys and factory workers, not trained technicians. They have designed assuming vehicles will be overloaded, abused, and operated by soldiers under fire. They have built a vehicle that accepts this reality, rather than demanding careful operation. Most troubling was the weight distribution Krüger had initially dismissed as poor engineering. The Jeep's extra 900 pounds wasn't inefficiency, it was durability. The frame was overbuilt, capable of supporting loads far beyond the rated capacity. Components were heavier than theoretically necessary. The Americans had decided that reliability under abuse mattered. Dietrich read the report and made a decision that would become policy throughout the Afrika Korps. His unit would preferentially use captured Jeeps over their own Kübelwagens. Within weeks, other units were doing the same. By summer 1942, a strange economy had emerged. German soldiers competed for captured Jeeps. Mechanics formed networks to share spare parts scavenged from disabled American vehicles. Units began painting captured Jeeps with German markings and using them for forward reconnaissance. The vehicles proved their worth daily. In soft sand where Kübelwagens struggled, Jeeps simply powered through using four-wheel drive. Where German vehicles required careful driving and often became stuck, the Jeep's low-range gearing allowed it to crawl over obstacles at walking speed. When Jeeps did get stuck, 4 soldiers could lift the 2,400-pound vehicle free. Try that with a disabled command car weighing twice as much. The Wehrmacht developed unofficial procedures for processing captured Jeeps. Mechanics would immediately service the vehicles, replacing filters and fluids. They painted over American markings with German crosses. Most importantly, they hoarded the technical manuals, which proved invaluable for maintenance. These manuals, written for American soldiers with minimal mechanical training, contained clear illustrations and simple instructions that made servicing remarkably straightforward. But the technical superiority, real as it was, paled beside another revelation, one that struck at the heart of German assumptions about the war itself. There were so many of them. Intelligence reports throughout 1942 attempted to quantify American Jeep production. The numbers seemed impossible. Early estimates suggested the Americans were producing perhaps 5,000 vehicles monthly. This already exceeded German light vehicle production substantially, but as more data arrived from multiple fronts, the estimates climbed. 10,000 per month, 15,000 per month. By late 1942, Wehrmacht intelligence was reporting that American factories were producing more than 20,000 Jeeps every month. The mathematics were staggering. Germany had produced approximately 50,000 Kübelwagens total from 1940 through 1942. The Americans were producing that many Jeeps every 10 weeks. Wehrmacht planners struggled to comprehend these figures. 20,000 vehicles monthly meant producing one Jeep every 2 minutes, operating around the clock. It seemed physically impossible. Surely the intelligence was wrong, inflated by American propaganda or Allied deception operations designed to demoralize German forces. But frontline reports confirmed the numbers. Every captured American document listed serial numbers. Intelligence officers compiled these numbers, tracking production sequences. The data was incontrovertible. American Jeep production exceeded even the most pessimistic estimates. Major Friedrich Steinhoff, attached to Wehrmacht intelligence, was tasked with investigating American automotive production capacity. His report, filed in November 1942, made grim reading for German planners. The American approach to military vehicle production differs fundamentally from our own, Steinhoff wrote, where we emphasize quality and engineering excellence, producing sophisticated vehicles in moderate quantities. The Americans have adopted mass production techniques developed by their civilian automotive industry. They produce adequate vehicles in enormous quantities. He detailed what German intelligence had learned about American factories. Ford's River Rouge plant could produce Jeeps at a rate of more than 100 per hour during peak production. 100 Jeeps per hour. In the time Germany needed to build a single, sophisticated command car, America was stamping out dozens of Jeeps. Steinhoff described the production process, pieced together from interrogations of captured American soldiers and intelligence gathered from neutral countries. The Americans had industrialized warfare in ways Germany couldn't match. Stamping presses shaped body panels in seconds. Assembly lines moved vehicles through sequential stations where workers performed single, repetitive tasks. The entire process, from raw steel to finished vehicle, took less than 1 day. More disturbing still, the Americans had converted civilian factories across their country to military production. Refrigerator plants were stamping body panels, washing machine factories were producing engines, farm equipment manufacturers were building transmissions. The entire American economy had been mobilized to produce war materiel at a scale Germany couldn't match. The strategic implications are severe, Steinhoff concluded. The enemy possesses production capacity that allows them to treat vehicles as expendable. Where we must carefully husband resources and repair every disabled vehicle, the Americans can afford to abandon damaged equipment and requisition replacements. This represents not a technological advantage, but an industrial advantage we cannot overcome through superior engineering alone. The report circulated through Wehrmacht command. Some officers dismissed it. Surely Steinhoff was being influenced by American propaganda. No nation could sustain such production rates. Others recognized the truth in what every frontline soldier was reporting. The Americans had Jeeps everywhere, thousands of them. Tens of thousands. And they kept coming. By late 1942, German forces across multiple fronts were encountering the same phenomenon. In North Africa, American Jeeps supported the Operation Torch landings. In the Pacific, though Germans weren't directly engaged, intelligence reports described Japanese forces facing similar numbers. In the Soviet Union, Lend-Lease shipments were delivering Jeeps by the thousands. Soviet generals praised them as superior to Soviet light vehicles, nicknaming them the American Mule. The psychological impact was subtle but corrosive. German soldiers were skilled. German officers were competent. German equipment, in many categories, was technically superior to Allied equivalents. But none of that mattered when the enemy could replace losses faster than you could inflict them. General Major Wolfgang Fischer, commanding a division in Tunisia in early 1943, wrote privately to a colleague, "We destroy their vehicles, kill their soldiers, seize their supplies. The next day, more vehicles appear. Always more. We captured 6 Jeeps last week. Intelligence estimates the Americans landed 3,000 in the past month. What is the strategic value of capturing 6 vehicles when the enemy has thousands more? Fischer's question captured the growing demoralization affecting German forces. Victory in individual engagements meant nothing when the enemy possessed unlimited replacement capacity. German units could win every tactical engagement, yet still lose the strategic campaign through simple attrition. The captures continued anyway, because captured jeeps were valuable beyond their military utility. They represented something German forces desperately lacked: reliability, abundance, the confidence that spare parts would be available, that fuel would arrive, that the vehicle would start each morning without elaborate cold weather preparations or careful maintenance rituals. German mechanics who serviced both Kübelwagens and captured jeeps developed a grudging respect that their superiors found uncomfortable. The Kübelwagen was the better engineered vehicle in many technical specifications: lighter, more fuel efficient. The air-cooled engine offered advantages in extreme temperatures, but the Jeep was better designed for what war actually demanded. Unteroffizier Ernst Becker, a mechanic with the Afrika Korps, explained it in a letter home in February 1943. Our Kübelwagen is like a fine watch: precision parts, careful assembly, excellent when maintained properly. The American Jeep is like a farming tractor: heavy, simple. It doesn't need to be maintained properly. You pour in fuel, turn the key, and it runs. When something breaks, you unbolt it and bolt on a replacement. Any replacement. They're all identical. This is not elegant, but in war, it is effective. That effectiveness was forcing German officers to confront an uncomfortable question. If American vehicles were crude and simple, why did German units prefer them over their own equipment? If American engineering was inferior, why were German mechanics praising their design? The answer was one Wehrmacht leadership resisted accepting. American engineering wasn't inferior. It was different, focused on different priorities. German engineering pursued perfection, optimizing performance under ideal conditions. American engineering pursued reliability, optimizing performance under the worst conditions soldiers would actually face. This philosophical difference extended beyond vehicles to encompass entire approaches to warfare. German military doctrine emphasized quality over quantity, believing superior technology and training would overcome numerical disadvantages. American doctrine emphasized mass and logistics, believing adequate equipment delivered in overwhelming numbers would prove decisive. The Desert War was demonstrating which philosophy suited total war better. In May 1943, the Afrika Korps surrendered in Tunisia. Approximately 250,000 German and Italian soldiers became prisoners of war. For many, the education in American production capacity was just beginning. The prisoner processing centers in North Africa offered German soldiers their first sustained exposure to American logistics operating at scale. Motor pools contained hundreds of vehicles: jeeps, trucks, command cars, all serviced with casual efficiency by young American soldiers who treated the equipment as disposable. When a vehicle developed mechanical problems, American mechanics didn't perform elaborate repairs. They swapped components or requisitioned a replacement. Captured mechanics watching American motor pool operations witnessed procedures that would have been impossible in the Wehrmacht. Tools were abundant, available without requisition delays or careful accountability. Spare parts arrived without forms or authorization, stocked in warehouses containing thousands of components. When a Jeep needed a new engine, the replacement arrived within days rather than weeks. The Americans had built a logistical system that assumed equipment would break, would be abused, would require constant replacement, and they'd built it to scale. One American motorpool sergeant, speaking passable German, gave an informal tour to a captured Afrika Korps mechanic in June 1943. "See, the thing is, we design everything so any farm boy can fix it," the sergeant explained. "Most of our guys never saw a vehicle engine before basic training, so we make it simple. Color-coded wires, standard bolts, everything labeled. We got manuals written for 6th grade reading levels." The captured mechanic examined a disassembled Jeep engine. Every component was clearly marked. The maintenance manual contained detailed illustrations that could be followed by someone with minimal mechanical knowledge. He asked the question that had been troubling him since his capture. "How many of these do you produce?" The sergeant shrugged. "Hell, I don't know exact numbers. Thousands every week, I'd guess. They keep coming off the production lines faster than we can ship them out. We got so many Jeeps that if one breaks down, we usually just grab another instead of fixing it immediately. Thousands every week." The number seemed impossible, yet the evidence surrounded them. The motor pool contained more vehicles than entire German divisions had possessed, and this was one small supply base supporting American operations in North Africa. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The journey to American prison camps continued the education. German prisoners were transported across the Mediterranean in Liberty ships, mass-produced cargo vessels that Americans were building faster than U-boats could sink them. At the peak of production, American shipyards were launching 3 Liberty ships per day, each capable of carrying 10,000 tons of cargo. The ships themselves embodied American production philosophy: simple design, welded construction, built in sections that could be assembled rapidly. At Norfolk, Virginia, the port processed thousands of tons of supplies daily. Cranes loaded and unloaded cargo at speeds that would have required armies of workers in Hamburg or Bremen. Containerization and mechanization had transformed American ports into efficient logistics hubs. German prisoners watching the operation saw material abundance that seemed almost wasteful. Crates of supplies stacked higher than buildings, warehouses stretching for acres. Trains carried prisoners across the United States in passenger coaches that, despite their purpose, offered comforts many prisoners hadn't experienced in years. And everywhere, vehicles. Cars filled parking lots outside, factories running multiple shifts. Trucks lined highways in convoys stretching for miles. Military vehicles sat in depot yards by the thousands, awaiting shipment to combat zones worldwide. The prisoners travelled through a country untouched by war, cities with intact buildings, factories with glass windows and electric lights, farms with modern equipment. The contrast with war-torn Europe was stark. America was fighting a global war while maintaining, even expanding, its civilian economy. At Camp Hearn, Texas, skilled mechanics among the prisoners volunteered for the motor pool. American commanders welcomed their expertise. For the next 2 years, German mechanics worked alongside American soldiers, maintaining the vehicles that kept the camp running. The experience proved educational in ways neither side anticipated. American mechanics approached vehicle maintenance with straightforward practicality. They weren't engineers striving for perfection. They were problem solvers focused on keeping equipment operational. When something broke, they fixed it quickly with whatever was available. When proper parts weren't available, they improvised. When a vehicle proved unrepairable, they cannibalized it for components and requested a replacement. The captured mechanics observed these techniques closely. German mechanics were trained to maintain vehicles to factory specifications, requiring specialized tools and proper procedures. American mechanics were trained to keep things running by any means necessary. In peacetime conditions, German methods produced better results. In wartime chaos, American methods proved vastly more effective. The motor pool at Camp Hearn processed hundreds of vehicles monthly. Jeeps came in for routine maintenance, received service in hours rather than days, and returned to duty. The efficiency came from parts abundance and component interchangeability. When a part needed replacement, the supply room had dozens in stock. When a tool was required, the tool room provided it immediately. When a vehicle was beyond repair, another took its place. One German mechanic befriended an American soldier who had worked for Ford before the war. The American proved knowledgeable about automotive production at scales German mechanics had never encountered. "Before the war, I worked assembly line at Willow Run," the American explained. "That's Ford's bomber plant outside Detroit, biggest factory in the world. We're building B-24 Liberators. Started production in '42. By the time I got drafted last year, we were completing one bomber every hour. Every single hour, a complete 4-engine heavy bomber rolled off that line. The arithmetic was staggering. 24 bombers per day, over 700 per month. From one factory, each bomber contained hundreds of thousands of parts, miles of wiring, sophisticated engines and instruments. Yet American factories were producing them like consumer goods. "How is such production possible?" the German mechanic asked. "Mass production principles," the American replied. "Mr. Ford figured out how to break down complex manufacturing into simple, repeatable steps. You don't need skilled craftsmen if every worker does one simple task repeatedly. A kid fresh off the farm can be trained in a week to install one type of bolt in one location. Do that with 1,000 workers, and you get massive output." This was the fundamental difference the German mechanic was beginning to understand. German production relied on skilled craftsmen building quality products in moderate quantities. American production relied on semi-skilled workers building adequate products in massive quantities. In peacetime, the German method produced superior products. In total war, the American method produced victory. "Same thing with Jeeps," the American continued. "Willys Overland makes them, so does Ford. Both plants use identical specifications. A part from a Willys Jeep fits a Ford Jeep perfectly. They're completely interchangeable. That means if one plant gets bombed or has problems, the other keeps producing. Maintenance is simple because every mechanic learns one vehicle, not dozens of variants." The German thought about the Wehrmacht's vehicle inventory. Dozens of different truck types from different manufacturers, each with unique parts and maintenance requirements. Kübelwagens from Volkswagen, command cars from Horch, Mercedes, and other manufacturers. Captured vehicles from across Europe, each requiring its own spare parts and technical knowledge. German logistics were a nightmare of incompatible systems. American logistics were streamlined through uniformity. "The real genius is we designed for manufacturability from the start," the American said. When they put out requirements for the Jeep back in '40, they gave companies just 75 days to produce a prototype. American Bantam did it in 49 days. Then Willys and Ford refined the design for mass production. Everything had to be simple to manufacture, simple to maintain, simple to repair. The captured mechanic had examined enough Jeeps to recognize this truth. The vehicle wasn't elegant. German engineers would have designed something more sophisticated, but sophistication impeded mass production, and mass production was winning the war. He examined a Jeep's chassis, pointing out features to the American. "This frame, 2 simple channel sections. Our engineers would use a more complex boxed frame for better torsional rigidity." "Sure," the American agreed, "but your complex frame takes longer to build and requires more skilled workers. Our simple frame can be produced faster, and if it's damaged, it's easier to repair or replace." The German nodded, slowly. Every design choice in the Jeep reflected this philosophy: simplicity over sophistication, maintainability over performance, producibility over perfection. By summer 1944, news of Operation Overlord reached the camps, the Allied invasion of Normandy. When reports arrived of the landing's success, many prisoners felt no surprise. The Allies had the manufacturing capacity to build an invasion fleet that would have taken Germany years to assemble. News filtered into the camps through American newspapers and radio broadcasts. 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 150,000 men in the first wave. Within weeks, millions of Allied soldiers would be fighting in Europe, all supplied by a production base that created equipment faster than the Wehrmacht could destroy it. In the motor pool one afternoon in late 1944, prisoners watched American soldiers loading Jeeps onto transport trucks for shipment to the port. A young private drove each Jeep up the loading ramps with casual confidence. Dozens of vehicles loaded in less than an hour, all bound for Europe to replace losses and supply new units. One German mechanic realized that this single loading operation at one camp in Texas represented more vehicles than his entire division had possessed in North Africa. And this scene was being repeated at camps and depots across America every single day. The mathematics became inescapable. Germany had mobilized its economy for total war, stripping civilian production to support military manufacturing. Yet German military vehicle production in 1943 totaled less than 100,000 units of all types. America, while maintaining a thriving civilian economy, produced over 2 million military vehicles the same year. The disparity wasn't just quantitative, it was qualitative. American vehicles were designed for wartime realities: ease of maintenance, interchangeable parts, simple operation, rugged, reliability. German vehicles were engineered to specifications that made sense in peacetime, but proved impractical in sustained combat. One prisoner, a former supply officer who had worked in German automotive plants before the war, explained what the Jeep represented to a group of fellow prisoners in November 1944. "We built vehicles to achieve engineering perfection. The Americans built them to be manufactured. In total war, that matters more. Look at this Jeep's engine block. It's cast, not machined to fine tolerances." The Americans sacrifice a small amount of performance for massive gains in production speed. They can train a semi-skilled worker to assemble one of these engines in a fraction of the time it takes to build a German engine. He pointed to the stamped metal body panels visible on a nearby Jeep. "These panels are crude compared to our vehicles, but they can be produced by the thousands in factories that previously made household appliances. The Americans have mobilized their entire economy. Every refrigerator factory, every washing machine plant, every commercial vehicle manufacturer, all converted to military production. We cannot match this capacity." The officers fell silent. He had articulated what many had begun to suspect. Germany's philosophy focused on quality and precision made sense in peacetime, but in total war, the American approach of adequate products delivered massively was proving devastatingly effective. In December 1944, news reached the camp of a German offensive in the Ardennes, what would become known as the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's last gamble in the West. The offensive relied heavily on capturing American fuel supplies, because Germany no longer had sufficient fuel to sustain armoured operations. More troubling were reports of Operation Greif, Otto Skorzeny's commando operation. German soldiers equipped with captured jeeps, American uniforms, and fake identification were tasked with infiltrating Allied lines to cause confusion and capture bridges. If even Skorzeny, Hitler's favourite commando, was reduced to depending on captured American equipment, that revealed everything about the Wehrmacht's material situation. The captured mechanics discussed this development with bitter irony. Germany's elite commandos, executing one of the war's most audacious operations, relied on captured jeeps because Germany couldn't produce adequate reconnaissance vehicles in sufficient quantities. The symbolism was unmistakable. The operation failed. American military police quickly identified German infiltrators through careful questioning about American culture and sports that Germans couldn't answer convincingly. The Ardennes offensive itself ground to a halt, not primarily from American resistance, fierce as it was, but because German forces ran out of fuel. Panzer divisions abandoned their tanks when fuel trucks failed to arrive. Infantry divisions resorted to horse-drawn transport because motorized logistics had collapsed. Spring 1945 brought news of Germany's collapse. The Red Army closed on Berlin from the east. American and British forces crossed the Rhine and drove deep into Germany from the west. In the camp motor pool, German mechanics continued their work, maintaining vehicles for an army that had defeated their homeland. They felt no satisfaction in their work, but no shame either. Germany had lost not because its soldiers lacked courage or skill, but because it had challenged powers whose production capacity it could never match. One afternoon in April, an American soldier approached with news. Germany surrendered. War's over in Europe. The mechanics nodded. They had expected this for months. "What happens to us now? You'll go home eventually." "Probably not immediately. Lots of logistics to work out. But you'll go home." One mechanic considered this. Home to a Germany that had been bombed into rubble, occupied by foreign armies. Its cities destroyed by the same manufacturing might that had produced the Jeep he had first examined years ago in Tunisia. The American asked a question. "You're a smart guy. Did you really think Germany could win?" The mechanic thought carefully about his answer. "Before the war, yes. We believed German quality would overcome American quantity. We had seen American products before the war, and many were inferior to German equivalents. We assumed American military equipment would be the same. He paused, looking at the jeep they stood beside. But it wasn't, the American prompted. No, the mechanic agreed. When we examined that first jeep in 42, we realized we had made a fundamental error. We had confused peacetime quality with wartime effectiveness. Your jeep wasn't better engineered than our Kübelwagen in absolute terms. It was better designed for mass production and field conditions. In total war, that proved decisive. The repatriation process began in late 1945. German prisoners boarded ships for the journey home. The mechanic arrived in Bremen in January 1946, processing through Allied control stations before being released. The city was ruins. Rubble stretched in every direction, the debris of buildings that had stood for centuries. The harbour that had once bustled with commercial shipping now served as a logistics hub for Allied occupation forces. But amid the destruction, he noticed something. American vehicles everywhere. Jeeps carrying Allied officers through the shattered streets. Trucks delivering relief supplies to German civilians facing starvation. Motor pools, where German civilians worked alongside Allied soldiers, maintaining the vehicles that now represented the only functioning transportation infrastructure. He approached one motor pool, introducing himself to the American captain in command. His English, learned during years of captivity, was serviceable. "Sir, I am a former mechanic of the Afrika Korps, recently repatriated from Camp Hearn, Texas. I am trained in vehicle maintenance with experience servicing American equipment. Are you hiring civilian workers?" The captain examined his identification papers. "Says here you worked in our motor pool in Texas. That right?" "Yes, sir. 2 years." The captain made a note. "We need mechanics desperately. Most German mechanics either died in the war or are still in POW camps. You can start tomorrow. Pay is in occupation script, redeemable for rations and necessities." And so the former Afrika Korps mechanic found himself employed by the army he had fought against, maintaining the same vehicles he had once examined as enemy equipment. The Allies needed mechanics. He needed work. The war was over. Life continued. Years later, working in that motor pool in Bremen, he would sometimes reflect on the journey that had brought him there. From that first encounter in the North African desert, laughing at the crude American vehicles, to understanding their genius, to depending on captured jeeps for survival, to finally maintaining them for the occupation forces. The jeep had taught him a lesson that extended far beyond automotive engineering. It had taught him that in war, practical effectiveness matters more than theoretical perfection. That sometimes the best solution isn't the most sophisticated one, but the one that works reliably under the worst conditions. That victory comes not just from brilliant technology, but from the industrial capacity to produce adequate technology in overwhelming quantities. By war's end, the United States had produced over 640,000 jeeps. It had become the most captured prize of the war, sought after by every army that encountered it. German, Japanese, Italian soldiers all competed to acquire captured jeeps, recognizing their superiority not through elegance, but through practical effectiveness. The little vehicle that German intelligence had dismissed as propaganda, that German officers had mocked as a toy, had helped win the war, not through technical sophistication, but through simple, rugged reliability, produced at a scale that made it ubiquitous across every theatre of combat. The mechanic tightened a bolt on a jeep's engine mount, a task he had performed thousands of times. The vehicle would start tomorrow morning, and the morning after, and the morning after that. It would run until something broke, and when something broke, he would fix it with parts that were abundant and standardized. That, ultimately, was the genius of the jeep. It accepted the reality of war, and was designed accordingly. And in accepting that reality, it had helped change the outcome of the largest conflict in human history. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. so you don't miss any upload from us.